I recently received an email from one of our group members. He was saying, look, I had a weird thought that in this crisis that I was in, that I should pray to the enemy rather than pray to God. And he said, it was such a weird thought. I don't know where it came from. I don't know why I had that thought. I think maybe for a minute I did, but I'm not really sure if I did it or not. And he said, look, I know the concept that you always talk about, Jamie, that God understands the true intents of our thoughts. And he says, that's a nice thought, but I'm just not sure the Bible really substantiates that. Can you help me out? And if you are like this individual and you've been having weird blasphemous thoughts or unwanted intrusive thoughts about any subject, and you're kind of going a little bit batty trying to get rid of it, this video is for you. I actually want to show you that yes, 100% the Bible substantiates the idea that God understands our thoughts. And he understands them much better than we do. But I just want to give you the biblical evidence for that in case it helps you as a Christian in recovery for OCD, if it helps you to walk away from the thoughts and not do compulsive behaviors to neutralize or argue with or try to fight with those thoughts, because that's going to make you a little neurotic. We don't want that to happen. We all want to be healed, so we have to learn how to walk away and not respond to weird, intrusive thoughts. So let's look at the Bible. If you're new here, my name is Jamie. I share biblical ideas for Christians dealing with OCD, which we wouldn't wish on our worst enemy. But I'm glad you're here, and let's jump in and take a look. We're going to go first to First John chapter 3. I've just stuck a bunch of pens and papers in my Bible, and I'm going to work backwards. So we're going to 1 John 3, and I will read for you verse 20. For if our heart condemns us, God is greater than our heart and knows all things. So here we see that sometimes the heart has a deceptive function where it condemns us when we ought not to be condemned. And the biblical truth in this passage is that God is flying high above that fog of lack of clarity that we may have. He understands our heart much better than we do, and he knows all things. The next verse, go backwards to Hebrews chapter 4, verse 12. It says, for the word of God is living and powerful and sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing even to the division of soul and spirit, of joints and marrow, and is a discerner of the thoughts and intents of the heart. I don't know why, but as this verse goes on talking about like splitting open bone and marrow, I somehow just got a weird picture of like high school science class when you're dissecting toads. Did anyone ever dissect like frogs or toads or anything like that? And you're like slicing it open, you're like, ew, this is so disgusting. And then you see all the organs inside and all of that. The word of God is a powerful thing, and it slices open and it cuts and it reveals. As it says, it is a discerner of the thoughts and intents of the heart. So we have thoughts that happen in our minds, and then there's also intents of the heart, which can be completely opposite of each other. I think if you have any experience at all with obsessive compulsive disorder, you know that is really the case for many of us, that we can have thoughts pass through our minds that absolutely don't belong there, are not part of our soul's deepest desire. If you don't know what OCD is, there's probably a season that you go through where you completely freak out about these thoughts and try to fix them, and you worry very much. But the reality here is that it pierces even to the division of soul and spirit. Whatever internal aspects there are to us as human beings, God can pierce through that and see, this is the real you, this is not the real you. And so your thoughts and the intents of your heart just lay open and naked before the great dissector of the universe. Next verse that we're going to is 1 Corinthians 3:20. And again, the Lord knows the thoughts of the wise, that they are futile. I love this verse. I've talked about it before. Paul is quoting from the Old Testament. He tweaks his quote a little bit because the Old Testament actually says that the Lord knows the thoughts of, I can't remember what the Old Testament says, but it doesn't say wise. And he's actually inserting the word wise here to indicate that even the wisest and very best of people have futile thoughts. And the Lord knows those thoughts. He knows the thoughts of even the wisest, that they are dumb. They're futile. They are meaningless. They are something that you can't possibly make good on. And that's quite comforting to me, because I often have thoughts that I am like, where is that coming from? Like, is that really the real me? And that's a futile thought. That's a senseless, purposeless, wasted, nonsense thought, and God knows that. It just says right there in the text, the Lord knows the thoughts of the wise, that they are futile. How comforting. Okay, going backward again, we're going to Jeremiah 17, verse 10. I, the Lord, search the heart. I test the mind, even to give every man according to his ways, according to the fruit of his doings. Now, of course, the sentiment here in this passage is talking about how God knows our thoughts, and that factors into judgment. But the comforting part is that he searches the heart and tests the mind. Like, he is not sitting back from afar like, okay, superficially, what did they think? Oh, they had a bad blasphemous thought. Oh, away with them. Like, God doesn't make a superficial judgment on our thoughts and the intents of our heart. He actually searches into it. He tests and probes, and I don't think you're going to even know when God is testing your heart and mind. I think that God has his own divine ways of working that we can't fully understand. But what this passage tells me is that it's not a superficial thing. God actually takes his time to look into a matter. What's really interesting with Christians with obsessive compulsive disorder, for whatever reason, the religious manifestation of OCD can be so misunderstood by everybody. Like, your pastor maybe thinks you have a demon, your psychologist thinks you have religious psychosis or some other explanation, your friends think you're just weird sitting in the corner muttering to yourself. So it's just very misunderstood by many people, and I think it's quite comforting to see that God is not misunderstanding us. Of all the voices you hear in your life right now, of all the people, you may be somebody with very supportive, like, friends and family. You might not. Maybe you have people, I've had people email me saying like, oh, my parents think I'm just making a big deal out of nothing, or my spouse doesn't believe me, and whatnot. But God does understand you. God takes the time to go deep, to understand you, to really understand the diagnosis of what's happening in your heart and mind. I think that's wonderful that he really does search the heart and test the mind. Okay, next to last verse. Psalm 139, 1-3. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know my sitting down and my rising up. You understand my thought afar off. You comprehend my path and my lying down, and are acquainted with all my ways. And verse 4, there is not a word on my tongue, but behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. So again, this mirrors what we just mentioned a moment ago, that from afar off, God understands the thoughts and intents of your heart. He gets it. He knows what's happening. Even the on your tongue, there's not a word on your tongue, but God already knows it. And that can be really comforting to people with religious OCD who maybe get to extreme points where they're so hard pressed with their OCD that maybe they actually utter the content of their blasphemous thoughts or intrusive thoughts. And of course, that's very, very triggering to do that. It makes you feel terrible, and you wonder, why did I say that? Did I mean to say that? Did I mean the content of what I just said? Why did I even express what was going on in my head? Well, you probably said it because it's been beating a tattoo on the inside of your head for the last 42 days, every second of every minute of every day, and so you just have to get it out and make your brain be quiet. So yeah, sometimes people with OCD will actually utter their intrusive thoughts and then just be in absolute horror of themselves. And God knows. There's not a word on my tongue, but behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. You know where that word came from. You know why it passed through my head, why it came out my mouth. You know everything. And that's really comforting that he knows. He knows that we don't mean the things that we often say. Okay, last verse I want to share with you. I actually really like this. I only found it fairly recently, and so yeah, I wanted to save it for last. 1 Chronicles 28, verse 9. As for you, my son Solomon, know the God of your father, and serve him with a loyal heart and with a willing mind. For the Lord searches all hearts and understands all the intent of the thoughts. If you seek him, he will be found by you. I really like this because it's a reminder that he searches all hearts, understands the intent of the thoughts. I just love that word that's being used, that he understands the intent of the thoughts. We don't always understand the intents of our own thoughts, right? Like, we're totally confused. Like, why did I think that thought? That's terrible. But God understands where that's coming from. He understands actually that there are pieces of the OCD brain that are working differently from normal people, and that we just can't help it. We have to learn how to cope with it, and there's a lot of coping skills that can help us live a very normal, very happy life, even with OCD sitting in the trunk. But he understands. He really does know that. And so there's this fear that many people with OCD have, that the thoughts that we think that we're earnestly trying to get rid of, that we're going to be held accountable for the stuff passing through our brains that we didn't want to be there. One person with OCD described it this way. He said, all day my brain forces me to look at things that scare me. And I think that happens to many of us, but then we start to feel that we're going to be held accountable for being forced to see things in our brain and hear things in our ears that we don't want to. And God's not like that. That's just a mantra. Maybe mantra is not the right word. That's just a motto that has been so helpful in my own recovery from OCD, is to remember that God's not like that. God is not the way my anxious brain tries to portray him. My anxious brain is full of all kinds of God distortions. And part of healing involves laying down those God distortions and picking up the truth in a non-compulsive way, please. Because, by the way, I should make a whole nother video about how the way we repeat verses and search into, all kinds of spiritual topics can be a compulsive behavior as well. But anyways, that's for another day, another time. We have to lay down our God distortions. And the God distortion here is that God either doesn't understand what I really meant to say or think. He holds me accountable for my mental health disorder, twisting my thoughts, and he doesn't love me enough to know the difference. And that's not true. God knows and he understands and he loves you despite the weird thoughts that sometimes may pass through your mind. So I just wanted to encourage you with that today. This is sort of a follow-up again to an email of, does the Bible really substantiate the idea that God understands my real thoughts? And I think you've seen from these sampling of verses that he does. I hope it encourages you, and I'll see you back for another video.